You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist, and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast, and thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Paige Smathers, and I'm your host, and I am really excited to share this conversation I had with Linda Tucker. Today, we're sharing a conversation where we explore the concept of enoughness, and we're talking about this with eating and food and hunger and fullness and all of that, but then beyond eating, what does enoughness mean in terms of body image, or in terms of being an entrepreneur, or whatever other concepts that enoughness touches, which, by the way, I think it's Linda and my opinion that it touches pretty much every aspect of our life. So this is a conversation I just thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm so grateful to have had. And I just want to quickly read Linda's bio so that you know who she is. She does briefly introduce herself in the podcast episode as well. But she is a certified intuitive eating counselor and a body image coach. She helps people walk away from diet culture while learning how to care for themselves using compassion and kindness rather than fear and or shame. Linda uses insight from her own disordered eating recovery while also trying to manage her chronic illnesses to create a space for curiosity, empathy, and radical acceptance. So some of the things I love about Linda is she's just a master with words. She is a very deep thinker. She is someone who reads every book and wrestles with concepts and likes to take things deep and really, really figure out what this means on a practical, realistic level. That's something that I really relate to her with and appreciate about her so much. And this conversation about enoughness, I think, is you're just going to love it. It's awesome. And I'm super grateful and excited to share it with you today. So thanks again for joining me. And here I give you my conversation with Linda Tucker. Hi, Linda. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast.
Hi, Paige. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, so just take a minute and introduce yourself to the listeners. Talk a little bit about what you do.
Okay, so I am a coach. I am a certified intuitive eating counselor coach. Never know really what the right term is there. I also work with people around body image recovery. I do touch on some kind of more generalized holistic health stuff like sleep and stress management and movement and those kinds of general topics. But yeah, I'm a coach. I work mostly virtually with people out of my home in Portland, and I do mostly one-on-one work, although I'm getting interested in doing more group stuff. And I just try to help bring awareness. I like to say to people, I give them a third option, where we live in a culture of so like black and white, what are my two choices? And I really just try to get curious and explore what the third option is for people.
Oh, whoa. I love that. I've never heard someone explain it that way. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, thanks. It's something I've been trying to work on. How do I explain what I do? So I'm glad it resonated.
It does with me. I know you know this about me, but I love gray. I love nuance. I love the middle way. I love choices and options. So that really resonates with me.
Well, and I have to give you some accolades because I was aware of you. I think I had followed you on Instagram. I had maybe listened to the podcast once or twice, but I forget when it even was. Was it last year when you really started talking about nuance and you kind of created that hashtag nuance matters, I think?
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, ooh, I like this gal. She is up my alley. And so that's when I kind of dove in headfirst and really started following you a little bit more. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. And little did we know we have lots in common. So, I
Yeah.
mean, not only and who knows if part of our personal stories are what make us think so similar and kind of have interests that align so much. I think that's really fascinating to think about.
I do too. I do think it's fascinating.
Hmm.
I like people that think in shades of gray.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so let's kind of introduce what we wanted to cover today. Is there any pertinent personal info you want to kind of give us as to why you came to this space or why intuitive eating and body image work resonate for you on a personal level before we dive into our topic?
Sure. I mean, just the kind of broad overview is that I definitely struggled with disordered eating. My story, it's hard to know what came first, the chicken or the egg, but I think the body shame stuff obviously came first. And then I started using behaviors, food, movement, different things to try to control my body. And I actually think now looking back, I had an immense amount of shame about that. I was someone, and this is funny because it'll come up with clients, and in a lot of ways, I think people are really similar, and I'm really similar to my clients, and in a lot of ways, the details are different. And so one of the big details that is different, but I hope I'm going to mention it because I wonder if there's other people out there that can relate, is I never actually talked about being on a diet or my food, really. I mean, maybe once I started, when social media came around and I started posting things, but it really made me uncomfortable when I had to admit that I was trying to lose weight or that I didn't like the way my body looked or that I was controlling my food, because I think somewhere deep down I knew that it was unhealthy and maybe I was a little embarrassed that I just couldn't love myself the way that I was. So I was not openly a dieter. I think people noticed that I had weird things with food. And then what happened was the more I restricted and the more I wanted to lose weight and the more kind of disordered I became with my eating, I recognized that people were going to recognize it. And so I very much took on the badge of health. And I talked about, chronic illnesses I had, and that was the reason why I was being weird with food. And it was for a lot of it, that was part of it. It was right kind of in like the late aughts, early 2010s where the Whole30 and these all these books were coming out about elimination diets, and I was getting elimination testing. So then I started talking more openly about it. But my struggle with my body image was something that I think I kept really private.
Interesting. Yeah. So were you already working as a coach at that point, or when did that come into the picture?
No, actually, funny enough, I was a hairstylist in my previous life. I was a hairstylist for 12 years. So I worked in the beauty industry, which, I mean, we could get into deep psychoanalysis about that with, beauty and body image and
You got some
such
good
focus
training
on
and
external
counseling
appearance.
skills, right? Just joking.
Yeah, some of my friends that are still hairdressers, when I talk to them about it, I'm like, I do the same thing you do, just but without the hair part.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. It's so true.
So yeah, so no, what happened was the more disordered I became, and this is a really important point, and I don't know if you've talked about the Minnesota starvation experiment on your podcast before.
I I can never remember what I've said, but
I know,
go
right?
ahead.
It's this fascinating thing. Maybe you can link to it in the show notes, but it's just this experiment. But one of the things they found was that when the men were starved, and we're talking about semi-starvation, we're talking about 1,600, 1,700 calories. I mean, they were essentially what we would think of as dieting, although they weren't calling it that. They were restricting their calories to study how semi-starvation states affect populations for war time. And so anyway, one of the things is that they all became obsessed with food. Like they ended up like years later quitting their jobs and becoming cooks, or like starting to collect cookbooks, or like reading women's magazines about food. And that is exactly what happened to me. The more disordered I became, the more obsessed with food I became. So much so that I quit my job and went to culinary school. And I did love cooking and food, but I think I remember saying to my husband, well, if I'm going to be researching and reading and obsessing about food all the time, I might as well be getting paid for it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I went to culinary school, decided I really just wanted to be more of like a food coach, health coach. So then I started doing some more traditional, quote unquote, I call it like green smoothie and quinoa health coaching. And then I was introduced to intuitive eating, and I just did a complete 180-degree turn.
What resonated with you about intuitive eating, or was it hard to digest it at first, or how was that for you?
No, and this is actually kind of a good segue into what we wanted to talk specifically about today. What resonated for me is that when I read it, it was just like, oh, this makes complete sense. Like it wasn't, I had body image struggles. I wanted to lose weight, but I knew that my relationship with food was completely bananas, and it wasn't even helping anymore. It wasn't helping me feel better. It was causing more stress and more anxiety. And when I read the book, I was just like, oh, so there is an answer, and the answer is there's no answer. And that was
Oh,
so
yeah.
freeing to me as someone it just wasn't fun anymore. I wasn't getting anything from my disordered relationship with food. I was over the honeymoon phase. It was just a slog. And when I read it, I was like, oh, this is truth. And I started using some of the tools, and I was working one-on-one with a coach there. It was actually the coach that introduced me to it, because I wasn't really thrilled with my business. And I was like, let me get some business coaching. And it was actually Isabel Fox and Duke.
Oh,
Um,
awesome.
yeah, I went to her for like quote unquote business coaching. And then I realized, oh, I see, my entire relationship with food and body is still completely disordered. Um, and she introduced me to intuitive eating and health at every size. So when I read the book, it just resonated with me. And I was like, this is what I need to do. I was causing harm in my old, business model. I want to heal myself, and then I want to help other people recognize that there's a third option.
Back to that third option. Love
Yeah.
it.
And
Um,
so I know, yeah, go ahead, go
no,
ahead.
you go ahead.
Well, I say I know one of the things we wanted to talk about was enoughness, and that really was an idea that I latched on, that I was not getting enough food just in general calorically, but I also wasn't getting enough variety. I wasn't getting enough pleasure. I wasn't getting enough joy or adventure or anything from it. And so it gave me permission to get more.
Mm. And not less, right? Such a paradigm shift from dieting, which is all about like, what do you cut out? What do you eat less of? Or what do you full on never eat again or whatever? And what a switch to say, okay, how do I get enough of all these aspects of eating that are important to me?
Yeah, that was something that I just felt like I had never read before. Maybe they would talk about, this diet, you can eat whatever you want within these categories, or you can eat as much as you want as long as it's this time of day. Like there was always some sort of, well, you can't really eat enough, all that you want. Like you have to like rein it in somehow. And this was saying, no, you can eat as much as you need in the way that feels good to you. End of story, no restrictions.
Yeah. So the word enough is, I was first sort of cued into thinking about this word enough from reading one of Brene Brown's books. I remember, I should have pulled the quote up, but I remember at one point in one of her books, she talks about how from the beginning of the day when we wake up, we start off with this like not enough mindset. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, I love Brene Brown and her work, and I think it's just part of the layer cake that kind of got me to this aha moment. Yeah, for sure.
So she says like from the first moment of your day, the alarm goes off, your first thought is, oh, I didn't get enough sleep. And then, then you're on to the next parts of your routine in the morning. And I don't have enough time to get to work, and I don't have enough time, and there's not enough, not enough. And she was just talking about all this almost subliminal messaging that we get from just the way we're approaching our lives and our routines that just bang us over the head multiple times a day with this message of there's not enough, I'm not enough, you're not enough, this isn't enough. And that's going to affect us in so many ways, including our relationship with food.
100%. And I think bringing up the work of Brene Brown is really important because that's when it all kind of clicked to me. I came to intuitive eating. It was like this spiritual aha moment. I did the work, I worked with a coach, and I healed my relationship with food pretty quickly. And I was like, okay, great. Yep, got it. Enough. Got to eat enough. You know, Isabel even said to me, intuitive eating at its core is just about getting enough. And I was like, great. Yep. And I moved on from that fairly easily and fairly quickly. The body image stuff was harder. And so then I was like, oh, okay, I guess I got to work on this stuff. And the core of the body image stuff is you are enough, right? Your body
Yeah,
is, you are,
same
you,
idea.
yeah, exactly. Same idea. And I was like, okay, so I've got to learn that my value as a woman, as a person, as a wife, as a friend, as a health professional is not dictated by the way that my body looks. Okay. And that took a lot longer. And to be honest, I'm still working on that. I don't know if we ever fully
Yeah, lifelong, right?
heal that wound. But then I think the next layer down came all of this, like enough time, enough sleep, enough money, enough social interaction, enough travel. I mean, all the things that we're bombarded with every day of you're not doing enough, you're not getting enough, you're not saying enough, you know, and that's when I was like, okay, universe, I see that you're trying to teach me this lesson about enough.
And don't you think part of the equation of the enoughness conversation is not only are we getting bombarded with messages that we're not enough in whatever way or we're not doing enough, I think we're also getting messages in a lot of ways of you're too much, which I think is the same is the other side of the enoughness coin.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you brought that up because in a lot of ways, especially around our relationship with food and body image, it's a lack. We feel an emptiness, right? We feel like there's a hole that needs to be filled and I'm going to fill it with yada, yada, yada. Where I think it gets really nuanced and juicy and interesting is when we say, okay, well, when do you know that you've had enough? When do you know that you've been busy enough today? When do you know that you've had enough social interaction time? I mean, I never realized I was more introverted than extroverted until I stopped dieting, really, because I was like, oh, I don't have to play this game if I don't want to.
Oh, whoa, fascinating. I've had a similar, I think I've had a similar transition and realization in my life. I think people who know me well would be surprised to hear that I don't really know if I'm an extrovert or an introvert. Because I'm starting to think maybe I'm more of an introvert because I've always, anyway, I've always thought of myself as an extrovert, but I'm kind of getting to know myself better, and I love my quiet alone time, me time. I struggle. I feel very overwhelmed with lots of people, big groups. And this is kind of new to me. This could be my time of life, having little kids, and maybe the work I do. It's very people oriented and in the world of words so much that maybe I just need more quiet. But that's so fascinating to hear you say that because I really have found that for myself as well.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, I think we have to be careful when we label ourselves because it changes and our
Sure.
situation changes. Like, I do wonder if the work that we do requires us to have more quiet time and downtime because we are giving so much. But I was introduced to the term extroverted introvert, and I think that describes me. I can go to the party and have the great conversation, but I know when I've had enough and I need to leave and it's no longer fun anymore and I feel like I'm forcing the smile, right? And so
Yeah.
I now feel empowered. And I think, again, it's a layer cake. It's my work on intuitive eating and my work on body image. And my husband and I, we've had some major life changes over the past 4 years that taught me completely valuable lessons about enough, right? We like really edited down our lifestyle and we moved into a studio apartment and we've moved around the world and we've traveled around the world with just a tiny, backpack. Like I've had to learn like what is enough? What is enough to pack? What is enough
Mm,
dishes? What is enough, space? What is enough money to support the lifestyle that we want? Like, more is great, I guess, but I'm not naive to the fact that to get beyond what is enough takes energy that I'm not necessarily willing to spend.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Okay, so I'm so interested in all this contemplation and work you've done with this concept of enoughness. How do you know? I think that's like the golden question. Yes, we all love the concept of enoughness, and I think many of us are becoming aware of just how much our society struggles with this concept and how we are so materialistic and just consuming, consuming, buying, 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 and I think it can feel really scary to start to think about this concept of enoughness. How do you know when you found it? So, what have you learned about that as you've practiced this?
Well, I think you're right. I think we have to just call a spade a spade. I love Target and I love Amazon and I like, clothes and that kind of stuff, but I'm not naive to the fact that marketing's job and capitalism's job is to tell us that we don't have enough so that we buy more, right? So I think it's hard to tap into our individual lives until we can look at the systems that we're surrounded by and say, okay, I understand the culture I'm living in, the society I'm living in, the systems I have to participate in, right? And so it really takes the onus off of you of like, there's something wrong with you if you haven't figured out what's enough yet, and saying, no, you're part of this big system, and let's talk about that. And hopefully I find that that's empowering. So thank you for bringing that up for people, that most of our mainstream culture is bombarding us with messages of like, not enough, not enough, not
Because
enough,
that's
not.
how they sell us stuff.
Yeah, right. I mean, you have to find the pain point, right? You have to say what will make this person hand over their hard-earned money
Right.
because that's the value. And I want to kind of go back to what I was saying. I know that my experiences of having these really profound life experiences are somewhat unique. I mean, I think we have similarities in everyone's stories, but I know that most people don't live in a studio apartment, and most people haven't completely downsized their life, and most people haven't started their own business. I mean, I'm sure you know what that's like. I mean, starting your own business will force you to face enoughness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I'm always trying to look and relate to how can people in different situations that haven't had my life experience still use some of the same tools that I've used. And I think the beauty of this tool of how do you know when you've gotten enough, you have enough, is your intercepts, right? Your quiet little feelings, voices, urges, ponderings. It's the same exact thing with eating, right? I mean, when you and I are doing intuitive eating 101, we're talking about, can you tune into your hunger signals? Can you tune into what sounds satisfying? And sometimes with people, I'll literally have them stand in front of their fridge and name things that are in their fridge and tune into the feeling that you get inside of you. Like, does this feel like something you'd want? Does this feel like something you'd want? And it is a muscle that you have to train. And I think intuitive eating is a beautiful training modality for that muscle. Sometimes you can use tangible things like journaling or working with a therapist or working with a coach or reading books or listening to podcasts. I think those help shed awareness on this tool. But at the end of the day, only you know when you have enough or when you need more.
Yeah, and I think the underlying process that has to be practiced or in place for this enoughness cue and muscle to be worked is trust, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if fundamentally you have a belief that you can't be trusted, your body can't be trusted, you're broken, you're wrong, you're bad, whatever it might be, I think that that makes all of this really hard, if not impossible. What's your opinion about that, though?
I completely agree. I think trust is it's always at the root of everything. So when we're unlearning harmful food behaviors, when we're trying to feel embodied and let go of the negative body image, we are essentially saying, I have to trust myself. I have to trust my internal body signals. I have to trust the inner dialogue that I have. I have to trust that when the bad body image demon rises up, that I can meet it. That's all a system of trust. I think when it comes to things beyond food and body image, when we talk about time or money or social interaction or physical intimacy or all these places where, all you have to do is go into a bookstore and like, what are they writing books about? Money, food, sex, relationships. These are the things that people want to learn about because something inside of them feels like I'm not getting enough, or this isn't right, or this isn't normal. And so with some of those non-food and body things, I do think it requires hard conversations, especially with people in our lives. And that's where the work of like Brene Brown is so important, because she shed a light on, everything you want is on the other side of vulnerability. So you have to have these hard conversations. You have to sit down with your partner and look at your finances. You have to sit down with your family and say, okay, the garage feels overwhelming to us. Like, can we clean it out? I mean, we've seen it with like Marie Kondo, and we've seen it, like this idea of taking 10 steps back and assessing your life and saying, does this feel right? Does this feel good? Does this feel nourishing? Does this feel fulfilling? And then having the hard conversations about it. That's where the real work begins.
Well, and yeah, like that can be with other people, or that can be with yourself too, right? Like getting to know yourself. And if something doesn't feel right, like instead of running away, maybe leaning into it a little bit and trying to figure out what that means about you. And if trust isn't there, why is that? And how can you practice that and work on that, right?
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I think it does have to start with yourself, because if you go to external sources for information or empowerment before you really have even a seed, it just plant the little seed of, I'm going to get curious about trusting myself. I believe that is a reality that I can have. I'm not there yet, but I know I can have it. That's when you can start going out to external places and getting, insight and conversations. But I think you have to plant that seed inside of you first.
Yeah, love it. So, intuitive eating, I'm always sensitive that someone might have just barely found my podcast by searching like nutrition into some podcast hosting situation. And so, just in case someone's like new to this world and they're like, what are they talking about? Let's just take a step back and talk about what is intuitive eating and how do people sometimes interpret it when they're new to it, and how do we take it deeper and work on this concept of enoughness in more ways than just hunger and fullness?
Well, I'm actually working on, I have to write a 5-minute script for this program, and it's about what is intuitive eating. And it's funny because I usually either have like 30 seconds to explain it or like an hour to explain it. So the 5-minute time frame is kind of tricky because I'm like, I can get into some deeper things. And so I've been pondering, what is it? How would I explain this to somebody who had never heard of it before? One of the things I came up with, and I posted it on my Instagram, and it really resonated with people, is essentially like in the absence of diet culture, which we can talk about that term if your audience may not be familiar with it. But in the absence of diet culture, intuitive eating would just be called eating. It's just eating, really, but we're eating without all the fear, shame, expectations, rules. Yes. It's just saying, okay, I feel hungry. What sounds good? What do I have? How much effort do I want to spend to make a meal? How long do I want to stay full for? And then you eat, and then you say, okay, was that enough? Do I want another portion? I don't know. Yes or no, move on. And then 4 hours later, you do it again.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that definition.
But I mean, to be a little bit more, a little bit deeper, it's really a philosophy that helps people relearn a way of eating that feels good, sustainable, realistic for them. It uses your internal bodily signals. It also uses things like your emotions, and we're not afraid of talking about emotions and eating. That's a really lovely, beautiful, natural thing. And then it also uses this magical little nugget called rational thought, which is like, okay, well, what do I have? How much money do I have to spend? How long do I want to be full for? How long until I'm going to be able to eat again? Do I need to use up this vegetable because it's going to go bad if I don't? So I guess I might as well throw that in the pan too. Like that's the rational part of it. It is an internal system where you're tuning into your body and really trusting your body's signals, but you can trust your rational thought too.
Yeah. Yes. I think sometimes I have a lot of clients who will be on Instagram and they'll learn about intuitive eating from following lots of people. And then they'll finally come in for a session with me and they're like, I'm so confused. Am I allowed
Mm-hmm.
to, yeah, like budget? Am I allowed to think about like adding a vegetable to my meal? Like, or what if I don't really want it, but I want to eat it because it's going to go bad? And there's all this sort of emphasis on the intuitive and the connection side, which, by the way, side note, I think is important because that's challenging the dominant narrative around food, which is it should all be rational and it should be food is fuel only, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
get why we focus on that more, but I think we also need to kind of show that other side, that side of, yeah, there's a practical side of eating. You have to shop, you have to cook, you have to plan a little bit, and you have to make decisions that aren't always based solely on, wow, this food sounds amazing. I just cannot wait to dive into it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this on a couple calls with clients, and it has resonated so well that I'm like, okay, well, this is something I'm going to start saying all the time. It's like, while unconditional permission is a huge foundational piece of intuitive eating, I do not want to underestimate how important this idea of you are a grown adult, you can decide what you want to eat, and there's no food that is morally superior or inferior to another, right? That is huge foundational. And I think that is so revolutionary to people that they grasp it and they say, yes. But this idea of if you think intuitive eating is simply eat whatever you want, that's sort of like thinking that being an adult is like just do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I mean, I guess like you're legally allowed, and I mean, but what kind of life do you want to have? Like, do you want to have a home? Do you want to have a savings account? Do you want to have a relationship? Do you want to have
Totally.
children? So we have, and this idea of rational thought, I think you nailed it the way that you described it. Dieting and healthism and all of these paradigms that are so fear based and so rules and external guideline based are solely rooted in rational thought, and I would even add like irrational fear. Um, that when people want to kind of quote unquote metaphorically go over to the other side of intuitive eating and non diet, they're so enamored and in love with the biological and emotional side of things that there's a lot of fear or resistance to bringing back in that rational thought
Yeah.
because I'm sure you've heard this is like, well, that means I'm on a diet again.
Yeah, I've been on this kick, Linda, of kind of trying to explore the nuance of what food freedom even means. And so often we give so much credit for food freedom, meaning eating cake and cupcakes and croissants and whatever else. And I'm with you, like yes, for sure. But I also think that a lot of people tend to sort of stop there. They're like, "Okay, cool. I made peace with muffins. Awesome." And but then they're still feel like having all of these scary, confusing feelings about broccoli, where it's like, well, how do I broccoli's scary. That represents dieting to me. And I want to say too, like I'm not saying that this necessarily happens all at once. I think there is a process to this, and there's my dog. Sorry. It's really itchy right
Okay.
now, I guess.
Well,
There's a process to this, but what I what I want to say is, I hope that eventually food freedom for folks means you're free of any association of morality to food, whether that's broccoli or muffins. I hope that it all can just be part of life, unless of course you happen to hate broccoli. Then
right.
substitute your favorite vegetable for that. I want you to be able to include vegetables without feeling like that automatically means you are engaging in diet culture.
Well, and I think you're exactly right. And I mean, listen, I will say that the book Intuitive Eating is not perfect. So much so that I've heard Evelyn, well, I mean, obviously nothing's perfect. So if we're expecting perfection, we're going to be disappointed. But there are some problematic languages and words and
They're
concepts.
working on
So
another edition. Did you know that?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I'm thrilled for that. And to me, that just shows the evolution of this work, right? We're all learning. The authors of intuitive eating also aren't perfect, and they're also women living in the world, and they've also been trained in traditional, you know what I mean? Like, this is the example of, like, we're just all doing this unlearning process together. But I do think that what you and I are talking about is in there. Like, I think it's like in the first 5 pages, they use my favorite definition of intuitive eating, which is it's the dynamic interplay between our biology, our emotions, and our rational thought. So this idea of like planning or incorporating things because they make you feel good or because why not, like why not have a little protein with your carbohydrate? That's just good for blood sugar regulation. Like it's sort of like the gentle nutrition aspect of it. It's always been in there. I just don't think that's the revolutionary part. And so people they don't latch on to that. They maybe don't get excited about that. They don't, think it's sort of like the catchy thing to put on Instagram. But that's where I find that this really clicks for people. And the first principle of intuitive eating is you're rejecting the diet mentality. It's less about, I care less about what you're eating than what you believe about what you're eating.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So a lot of people who are new to intuitive eating will kind of fall into the trap, which is understandable and they're not to blame, but kind of fall into the trap of turning it into the hunger and fullness diet. And
Yes.
back to our main theme of the day to talk about enoughness, it sort of becomes this like anxiety about, oh no, am I getting enough? Is this enough? Am I doing enough? Am I doing this right? What are your thoughts about how someone can kind of settle into balancing the principles and not pedestalizing hunger and fullness over the other principles of intuitive eating?
I think it's hugely important. I'll go back to like when I was first exposed or introduced to the idea and concepts and even language of intuitive eating was by my mentor at the time, Isabel Foxen Duke, and she coined the term the hunger and fullness diet. Like she was the one that kind of saw like, oh, this is what's happening with people. So I was really lucky that from day one, it was like, this is intuitive eating. It's amazing. It will change your relationship with food. It's full of amazing wisdom. And also beware of the hunger and fullness diet, right? It was like from the beginning, I was like taught, don't worry so much about getting it right. Just make sure you're getting enough. And that was hugely beneficial. And I think it's like a blessing and a curse that the language and information and ideas of intuitive eating are so widespread and getting out there in such a vast such a vast spaces, whether it's social media or like my dad is a pharmacist consultant and it'll be like in his Pharmacy Times magazine or something, like it really is spreading to all corners of the earth. But what I'm afraid we're losing is sort of the nuance in, tuning into your hunger and your fullness cues is a big part of this. It's just not the only part of it. It's really kind of the entryway into the really juicy stuff, which is like satisfaction and enoughness and playing with food and having joy around food and allowing emotions to be there. It's like hunger and fullness is kind of the first step on a long staircase. So I just think it's like, it matters. It's just not the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
I actually think hunger matters a little bit more than fullness. So I really try to get people to focus on just making sure that you're not getting too hungry. I heard, I think Kate Scarlatta on a different podcast the other day, and she's been doing this forever. And she was like, if I could boil down my 2 most important bits of nutrition information, it's eat things you like and don't let yourself get too hungry.
Yeah. And I've seen people who are really scared of hunger and they need to actually like they get so worried about getting too hungry that they're eating all day long. And so I've actually done work with people to help them kind of make peace with that cue and not be so afraid of it anymore too. So I think there's so many different ways to look at that.
I think so too. I mean, I do think that it's depending on especially your history and what your behaviors and symptoms are. It could be I mean, it really could be something you work on for a while. It's just, again, I don't think it would be the only thing that you eventually work on, right?
Yeah.
Because food is much more complicated than I'm just going to eat when I'm hungry and stop when I'm full. It's that's like baseline, you have to, it's like triage. We got to get that good. And then we can start talking about all the other parts of food.
Well, and like you said in the beginning, which I just loved, it's about getting enough food, sure, but also like enough satisfaction and enough like joy and enough like peace and more rather than less, I think is such a shift for people, and not just in terms of food, but also just in terms of you as a human. What do you need out of the eating experience? And looking at what's important to you and making sure that those elements are in balance with each other.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful work. I love the saying, once you can intuitively eat, you can intuitively do anything. Because
Yeah.
again, it goes back to that idea, like this is just a muscle. It's an underdeveloped muscle. It's a muscle that I wish I knew human anatomy to know, like maybe you have a physical therapist or something in your audience that can tell me like what's a muscle in our body that's actually super powerful and important, but because we never use it, it gets underdeveloped, right? It's like that's kind of how I feel
Yeah.
like trust and intuitive eating is. It's like it's there, we're born with it, we just usually don't know how to strengthen it, and so it kind of lays dormant and underdeveloped. And then once you find it, you're like, oh my goodness, I can use this muscle to help me with anything. Everything in my life got better when I started doing this work. My relationships got better, my money situation got better, my time management, my everything got better, because I was like, I can trust that I know what's best for me.
Right. And that's a skill that you can learn with food because it's something you have to do multiple times a day that then can kind of extend out and permeate into other areas of life. It's we tend to sort of separate off, oh, this is my food, and then these are my relationships, and then this is my work life, and it's like, no, it's just you. It's all just you. So if you're doing it with food, you're learning it in other ways too, which I think makes our work so meaningful because it is about the food, but it's not all only about the food, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have the gift of being able to teach amazing life wisdom through the beautiful, delicious, interesting modality of food that people have to do, right? So that's the interesting thing about this work, is that you have to eat. So everyone, I remember people used to say this for me with haircuts, right? Like, don't have scarcity mindset around it because everybody's got to get their hair cut, right? Like, it's just a human need. I've also heard, people in funeral services, they're always like, yep, business is always good, like it's just, it's one of those things that we all experience and that we have to do and we get to do. It's a joy to do, but we also need to do it to live. And that gets into, I'm sure, something you've talked about with people. It's like, not every meal is going to be this like beautiful, delicious, visually appealing. Like sometimes you're just going to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in your car when you're driving to an appointment because you have to eat. And so we get to use this modality and teach people something really practical and tangible. And then we get to sit back and watch how they apply it to the parts of their life that are extra, right? Of like, oh, and then I decided I wanted to do this. I don't know if you've ever worked with people who have like changed their jobs or joined new groups or started a new hobby or gotten creative in another way because they've realized, oh, these physical needs are being met, and now I have all this time and energy and space for other beautiful,
Oh yeah.
joyful extras.
Yeah, that's the best part of this stuff is then it frees up time and energy to start really figuring out who you are and what you're good at and what you want to do in this world. And that's I love this work for that reason. It's really rewarding.
Yeah, when you get enough, when you know what you need to get enough and you can recognize when you've had enough, you are free to then move on to another part of your life, right? It's sort of like when you go to a big grocery shopping and you know your fridge and pantry is full, there's like, oh, okay, I don't need to worry about that for like another week, right? And then
Yeah.
you can go on and do another task or another thing that you wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Linda, tell me about the relationship you see between the concept of enoughness with the concept of shoulds or expectations. So tell me about sort of that interplay.
I mean, I think it's a direct correlation. I don't love the term should, even though I catch myself using it all the time, right?
So do I. Yeah.
And I think I'm just realizing this now, but I think that's a beautiful example of we're not going to be perfect and we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And it's more about, if I'm looking at my day and I'm like, okay, I need to do this, this, and this. Well, I should do the laundry first because I can do that while I'm at home, right? Like that's how I'll use should. Like it's different than when you're saying I should be in a smaller body, or I should be eating more vegetables, or I should be going to this party on Saturday night that I really don't want to go to.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's a different kind of should. That's a should that if you look at the emotion behind it is I'm not good enough unless I do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like if I just say I should do my laundry first this morning because it makes the most sense, I don't feel shame or guilt or unworthiness if I don't.
Right.
Right? It's really about what's the intention and the emotion behind when you're using the word should or even expectations. I mean, I read a lot of like Eastern philosophy stuff, and it's really introduced me to this idea of like expectations are fantasies, and it's okay to have fantasies, right? I think daydreaming and faith and hope, these things are beautiful things, but just call a spade a spade. Just realize like if you're expecting someone to behave in a certain way, or you're expecting the cake to turn out like this, or you're expecting your day to go out in this order, that's a fantasy.
Yeah.
That's okay. You can have that fantasy, but just when and if it doesn't happen that way, you will be less distraught because there'll be like this less grasping control of like, but I expected it to turn out this way and it didn't.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So, one of the things you said earlier on that I kind of want to circle back to is you said that the work with food and figuring out what enoughness meant with food was relatively um, easier than it was for you to work on enoughness as a human and with body image and with that more kind of emotional side of things. So, do you have any thoughts about that, or do you want to dive into that a little bit deeper? What's been helpful for you to work on your own sense of enoughness outside of food and more with body image?
I think it's a great question. I actually think it ties into the last question you asked me, which I'm not even sure I officially answered. But I think the difference is the energy and the emotion and to use kind of therapeutic term, like the wound behind a feeling. So when I went into healing my relationship with food, that came fairly easy to me because it was a fairly tangible, easy thing to grasp, right? Of like, okay, I have these bodily sensations about hunger. I rationally know I need to eat to live. I know what things I'd like to taste good. I have immense amount of privilege, right? I do think that that's a huge part of it, is that it does come easier for people that have time and money and energy to devote to it, right? I could go out and get food that I needed or wanted, and I didn't have to worry about food insecurity and all those things. That's why I think it was more of a tangible, like, I've had enough. I'm going to stop eating now. Where the body image stuff comes in and the other things that you mentioned, that's where it gets trickier because that's not as tangible, right? That's not, I think diet culture tries to make it tangible. Like if you get to this certain body size or if you look this certain way, then you will say, okay, I'm enough. That's a very different thing than hunger and fullness, right? Like those are tangible things. Body image it exists in your mind. It's a mental and emotional state. So you have to learn internally to give up these ideas of should and expectation, because if you don't, you're never going to be enough. There isn't, it's the difference kind of, I've heard people when they talk about food addiction, which is a whole other topic, but it's like, if you have an addiction to cocaine, the more cocaine you do, the more you want, right? It's like, you're never going to have enough. Whereas food is very different because I can really love ice cream, but there will get a point where I'm like, I physically cannot eat any more ice cream. Like it's made me sick. I have no interest in it anymore. That's where I think the food and body image stuff is different because there seems to be no rock bottom or no ceiling to where people say, okay, I'm good enough.
Oh, that's so true. Hearing you say that makes me think of a couple of moments in the last, like, maybe year or so. I've come across, just movies or things I've been doing with my family in my personal life, and this message of never enough has come up, like The Greatest Showman, right? So the famous song from there, and then the Hamilton soundtrack. Have you heard? Are you into Hamilton?
Listened to it, but I mean, I don't know it
Okay.
too.
So the whole time Hamilton's wife Eliza is like, that would be enough if you just came home at the end of the day and you stayed alive. Like that's all I want. What's like, and so throughout he's like, no, I got to keep climbing. I got to keep doing. I got to keep accomplishing. And then all this tragedy happens in his life and he's destitute and he is like wishing he could trade places with his son who passed away. And he's finally telling his wife, like, I have figured out, like, this would be enough if I could do this for you, to trade places with him. And it's such a beautiful moment in his story and in his
It,
narrative. Like, I have finally figured out what the meaning of enoughness is, and this is something like she's been trying to get him to do this whole time. Like, just come home and be with our family, and just come home at the end of the day. Um, and like you said, as an entrepreneur, someone who owns your own business and who's driven, and all the things about you as a person and your personality, it's like you do really have to grapple with this concept of enoughness all the time.
mhm.
It is you're so right when you say there's no ceiling or rock bottom of, like, when something's going to just knock you over the head and, like, okay, this is enough now. It's really, it's got to be something else. It's got to be a choice or something you really practice and think about, because it's not super obvious.
Well, right. I mean, this is where I could talk endlessly about this because then you get into, okay, it's because it's my identity. It's because I have childhood wounds. It's because have compare and despair. It's because I have shame and I don't know how to. I mean, that's the beauty of Brené's work, right? Is that she's given us a common language and vocabulary and really tangible ways to say, oh, what's happening right now is I am in a shame spiral. Okay, let me recognize that this is happening. Let me take a step back. Let me, share it with somebody. They use the term in, I think, recovery circles of a God-sized hole. We're trying to fill a God-sized hole. And you could use universe, you could use existential, you could use any sort of word that says, oh, this is this hole within us that we're trying to fill with substances, work, money, likes on Instagram. And because it's never going to get filled by those things, it just seems like it's an empty pit that we could keep throwing everything into.
Yeah, and that's the reactivity, right? So we're trained through the systems in place in society, through advertising, through all these different ways, to just continually come at life through this lens of there's not enough, I'm not enough, you're not enough. And I think at some point we have to kind of pause and just look around and be like, okay, um, this is a belief I've bought into, and I'm going to look at that and I'm going to really figure out what does enoughness mean to me, with food, or with my professional life, or with um, whatever other category it might be. And I think this has to be a conscious thing we do. Otherwise, I think we risk being continually caught up in the hamster wheel of reactivity.
Well, and then we risk burnout, right? It's like the only person we end up harming is ourselves and
Great
then the
point.
people that we love, right? Our families, our children, our spouses, our clients, right? If we don't learn this lesson of enoughness, we will burn out either physically, mentally, emotionally, and then we really won't have enough, right? If it's like, don't tempt fate, right? If like you really
Yeah.
aren't willing to learn these lessons, I'll leave a couple of these quotes that I use all the time, but one of my favorite movies is Mary Poppins. And she has this great line in there, which is enough is as good as a feast, which is like once, and I love that because it pertains particularly to food. But she's really talking about it with the children because they had this wonderful day and they had all these adventures and they were like, we want more, we want more, we want more. And she knows in her wisdom that she's like, they've had enough for today and enough is as good as a feast. And when the opportunity arises, we'll have another fun experience again. The women of Be Nourished, I don't know if you're familiar with their work, Hillary and Dana. They're amazing. And I haven't done their body trust program, but I really want to. And they talk a lot about doing C+ work, which I think I've used that with clients and they are like, oh, so many people are perfectionists or, and I had one client say, can I just say B-? That just feels better. I'm like, okay, you can say B-. But it's like, what if we're C+ parents? What if we're C+ business owners? What if we're C+ eaters? What if we're C+ housekeepers? This idea of perfectionism is so tempting and it's completely shallow and false. And it will never actually work because it's never actually been the problem.
That is such a great point. And I know from professional experience saying stuff like that to clients who are really in the perfectionist mindset like that will feel so shocking and so scary and bring up a lot of emotions. Hearing someone say, just be a C+ parent or a C+ employee or whatever. It's hard for people to hear.
It is hard for people. And I do think it's, it's a jumping off point. But I think actually what it does is if it brings up emotions in people, those are the emotions that we need to talk about. If doing C+ work brings up feelings of shame or unworthiness or unlovability or then that's a good indicator of, okay, that's where we need to dig in about, because it's not actually about the food that we've talked about for 4 sessions. It's about the fact that you don't feel like you're doing enough or being perfect enough. And we can't actually treat the problem until we get to the root cause of it.
Yeah, totally. You know how Michael Scott in The Office has a mug that says world's greatest boss or something like that?
Yes.
I've heard it said what if we all had our own mug that's world's okayest dietitian or world's okayest podcaster or world's okayest mom. I'm not the best, and what if that's okay,
Well, I'll share a little behind the scenes secret that before we started recording, we were just talking through some logistics and I was like, hey, my windows are open. Are you going to hear a lot of background noise? And you're like, I'm not trying to do the perfect podcast. And I was like, I love that. And I love those examples. I am so inspired by other professionals, women, people that openly reject even a benign thing like me asking if there's background noise, right? But me being like, yep, another great example of, oh my gosh, I was trying to make it so perfect. And Brene does a great job of explaining the difference between perfectionism and healthy striving. You and I are both striving to do a good job on this podcast, right? And we're not being careless or flippant about it. But we're also like, you know what? This is the best we're going to do today. And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share one other funny thing. So I have a value sheet that I have handed out probably over 1,000 times at this point because I've done it at presentations with clinicians. And anyway, it's a thing. So at one point, early on when I started passing this handout out, I had the same value written twice. It was perseverance or something. And people have pointed it out. Do you know you have this here twice? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And I actually don't change it because one of my values is I'm just doing the best I can. And I think it's valuable for people to see this handout is imperfect, kind of a little bit on purpose. I mean, I didn't do that on purpose originally, but I haven't changed it because why not? Why change it? It's fine.
Well, that gets into a great term of imperfection. I was on a call with a client the other day and we were talking about this idea of can we embrace our imperfections? And I actually was I don't even know. I was like, yes, right. Like I get that. Another line from Mary Poppins is, practically perfect in every way. And I was like, what if we said practically imperfect in every way? But then we were talking about it and I said, she's like, I'm an imperfect human. And I was like, what if you're a perfect human, which being a human inherently means you have shortcomings and make mistakes and learn and grow. And that's what makes it beautiful and perfect.
It's a great point.
Yeah. And so she was like, yeah, I like that actually, because the language we use of like, well, I'm just imperfect and I guess I have to accept that. Well, I get behind the idea of it and totally believe in that. I do think we're setting ourselves up a little bit to be frustrated or, I don't know. I just want us to all realize like we are amazing. And because we make mistakes and have typos and our house is a mess sometimes, and sometimes we eat past the point of fullness and we go, oh, haha, can we like laugh and pat ourselves on the head and say, oh, Linda, you're so cute that you do that sometimes.
Yeah.
You're just a human.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I love that. So, Linda, talk about your recent project, Women Eating Food.
Yeah. So speaking of, this is exactly fellow colleague and dietitian friend of mine, Alyssa Rumsey. She and I met at a conference and we kind of bonded, and she posted this picture on her Instagram feed. I follow her on Instagram, which was her eating a sub on the beach. And she was talking about in her comment how she just finished watching Samin Norsrat. I think that's how you say her name. Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat series on Netflix. Have you seen that, Paige?
Yes, I loved it.
So great. Not only as someone who loves food like I do, which now I feel like I love food in the appropriate place in my life, right? It's like I love it. It's not my whole life. She doesn't look like a typical TV show host, right? She's not in a very thin body. She's a woman of color.
She's so excited about food and so passionate about it. Like it's so contagious. She's just so fun.
Yeah, it's pleasure, but I think they do a great job of like, it's pleasure, but really nuanced, respectful pleasure, right? It's like, it's this beautiful, the faces that she makes. So Alyssa was just kind of talking about how she was really inspired to be a woman who shows the pleasure of eating food. And I just kind of commented like, this should be a thing, right? This should be like hashtag women eating food. And she reached out to me privately. She's like, Linda, there are no posts with that. And so she's like, if you Google women eating food, it's all thin, white, conventionally attractive women, usually eating quote unquote something healthy.
Like salad or something, right?
Right. And smiling. And to be honest, not even eating the salad, standing, holding the fork up or sitting in front of salad, right? They're not even really eating it, which is a whole nother crazy level. So we're like, let's do this thing. And we just kind of both posted something and it's really taken off. And the messages I get from people are incredible. They're like, I never thought that it would matter so much seeing women putting food into their mouth unapologetically.
I think it's such a cool project.
It's quite profound.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. So, just go on Instagram. I think Facebook too, although I'm not as active on Facebook, and just search the hashtag. You can actually follow hashtags. I don't know if people know that, but you can search the hashtag women eating food, and then you can select to follow it, and it will start to show images in your feed of all different kinds of people that you don't necessarily have to follow at all, but just their images. And we really want it to be a place where women of different sizes, different colors, different abilities, to really normalize the fact that we all eat food. Sometimes we eat it, it's super pleasurable, and we're at this like amazing experience. And sometimes we're just like eating it at our desk while we're typing an email. But it's really to show you are enough, make sure you get enough, and realize that there's so many other people out there that are struggling with this same thing, and to take a step back and look at it rationally to say, what have we gotten ourselves into that seeing a woman eating food is considered a revolutionary, radical act nowadays?
Yeah, that's kind of wild. That's the wildest part about it, that it feels so revolutionary for people,
Yeah, and without the guise of, to touch just a little bit back on that idea of like capitalism and selling things, 90% of the posts are, hey, this is just me eating, right? Not like, I am eating this, so reach out to me so I can sell you this, or come to this restaurant, right? There's normally not this under like, well, I'm going to use my image to sell something, right? It's just unapologetic, no explanation, um, other than, hey, this looks really good and I'm enjoying it. Just wanted to share it with you. Because I also think we aren't used to seeing that. If we do see women eating food, a lot of times it's, I'm a health coach, or I'm a person running this program, or I sell this food. Come, come buy, come consume, come give me your money.
Well,
And
and so
so,
many folks are scared to eat in front of other people. And so how empowering to see unapologetic women blasting their photo of, sauce dripping down their face, eating whatever, and potentially thousands of people are seeing it. Like, I just think that that sends a cool, like, even if it feels inaccessible to someone to eat in front of folks, or to put that type of picture online of themselves, it at least gives sort of some time and space and some visibility to something that maybe might challenge that fear for them a little bit, help them kind of work through it.
yeah, I completely agree. You don't necessarily have to participate in it to benefit from it, right? There are, for a lot of different reasons, someone might not feel comfortable, most of which are that we have an incredibly like fat phobic, judgmental, misogynistic, ageist culture that says, okay, well, if you're young and attractive, you can post this picture, right? But so I get why people may not feel comfortable posting their picture, but I still know that they benefit from seeing it. And the truth is, the more people post outside of that small box, the braver. I mean, we've seen this with kind of like the Me Too movement, not to compare it by any means, but just this idea of the more people stand up and say, I'm going to be a little bit brave, then everybody else starts being a little bit brave. And then we kind of have this collective energy of bravery and acceptance and rebellion, truly.
Oh, I love it. I am so, and it goes really well with our topic of talking about enoughness, like, especially from the perspective of, like, well, I guess both perspectives of getting enough food, but also working on your own sense of enoughness on a personal, emotional identity level. I think that does such a good job of kind of chipping away at many angles of that equation.
Yeah, I think I commented in one of the things you and I were going back and forth about is like, I think there's a lot of talk of balance, especially in the health and wellness world. And that's a valuable ideology and philosophy. I do think it's been co opted a little bit. I think it's just another thing to make people feel bad about themselves, that they're not balanced, right? And so I was like, I'm really starting to use the word enoughness instead of balance, because it's newer, and I don't think in our brains we have as much guilt or fear or shame around it, because we haven't been really talking about it in this kind of way. So I hope that your listeners can start to feel empowered by, okay, I'm striving for enoughness, getting enough, and knowing when I've had enough, and I'm not going to let it become another thing to make me feel bad about myself.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I love it. I've loved this conversation, Linda. Is there anything else you'd want to add, or do you think we hit on what we wanted to talk about today?
I think so. I mean, yeah, there's nothing that stands out to me that I think that we didn't talk about. I think if anything, we're just opening up the conversation so that people can have more discussions about something that is really kind of hard to define an individual, which means that it's really ripe for discussion, because there's not a book I can write to tell you, Susie Jones out there, how to get enough, right? Like, this is something that you have to do yourself. And what a wonderful, what a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, how can people follow along with your work, Linda? Where can people find you?
So everything's my name, Linda Tucker. So lindatuckercoaching.com is my website. Linda Tucker Coaching is my Instagram handle. You can find me on Facebook. I really love interacting with people. So even just reaching out and say, hey, I heard you on Paige's podcast, makes me realize that there are people out there listening to
I
us.
know it's such a weird thing. You put this out there and you're like, oh, this isn't real, or I don't know. And then all of a sudden people reach out and you're like, whoa, real humans. It's a
Yeah,
bizarre
no,
thing.
I love it. I do this work because I love people and I love hearing their stories. So The more I can hear people's story, I hear myself talk enough. I want to hear other people talk.
Oh, I'm with you, sis. I have to edit these things and I'm like, okay, I am done with my voice.
You've had
Okay.
enough.
Well, thank you for joining me and thank you for all of your insight here. I've just thoroughly enjoyed this conversation about enoughness, and I hope people feel free to share with friends and family. And thanks again, Linda, so much for joining me.
Thanks again for having me.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.